Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Amanda Shee. I'm an anesthesiologist and intensivist, and today I'm going to be talking all about some information on the AAMC ERAS or ERAS supplemental application and preference signaling and all the signaling stuff that has been introduced for the 2022-2023 application season or the 2023 match season. So stay tuned for all the things that I have to talk about on this. I recently met up with a current medical student who had an interest in anesthesiology, and it was brought to my attention by the applicant that the specialty will be participating in preference signaling or the supplemental ERAS application for the upcoming match season. Now, this was interesting because I had been reading about different things on preference signaling in otolaryngology. I know that they had started a pilot program, and I hadn't actually realized that for the 2022 match season that 3 specialties had already started the process of using the supplemental ERAS application and using preference signaling in order to determine applicants for interview plus minus on whether that actually happened the way that it was designed to happen. Now, this was a pilot year, so who knows, really big picture, the impact overall. But I think it's important to look at the data that we have right now so that we can make some guesses, and I can maybe guesstimate or provide some potential insight into what I think about this process and what it means for this application cycle and applicants like you. First and foremost, I do want to mention that when I started looking into the preference signaling program and tried to get more information on it, I really wanted to create this video with real data and real advice that is practical and useful for all of you guys. So when I did that, I fell into this rabbit hole because there is so much interesting information here that eventually I said, that's it, I'm done looking for things, I'm just gonna use what I have and record this video and start the process at least of sharing what I found. So I wanted to get started with an introduction to preference signaling. So one of the articles I found was actually written by some individuals in emergency medicine as advocates for preference signaling in the match. Now, the actual concept of preference signaling actually started or is rooted in game theory, and it was designed in the setting of labor economics to address the challenges of employers not being able to perform a detailed analysis of all potential applicants and aiding the employers in identifying high-yield employee prospects. Now, in certain ways, I actually think that this sounds very applicable to the match process because currently with virtual interviews and COVID and the pandemic still raging on, we're finding that residency programs are getting more and more applications than they can handle. And truly, getting more applications doesn't necessarily lead to the best match outcome for the applicants because there's only so many interview spots available. So if people are just applying everywhere and not actually serious about where they want to go, that dilutes everything for everyone. So I think it's so important to consider the fact that by, again, this as you guys enter in the cycle, taking interviews from other people really prevents those people from having opportunities that they may have normally had if we had a normal interview season where we actually had to travel, because you can't just stack back to back interviews in the old way where people had to travel. This all being said, I think virtual interviews are actually a really great thing because I think it levels some of the playing field when it comes to socioeconomic factors and some of the issues that come with finances of interviewing. And so as a result, I think overall virtual interviews are great and they can be beneficial and useful in an equity sphere. But in terms of trying to actually weed out and select candidates that are interested in programs, residency programs are struggling. There's only so much holistic review residency program can do when they have limited people, limited faculty. Oftentimes it's volunteerism based, and being able to actually screen everyone with a keen and careful eye becomes impossible with a huge volume of applications. So we end up having to take a hammer to things and doing different types of cutoffs in order to be able to select which people we're going to interview. This preference signaling comes into play with this, because if an applicant demonstrates that they can use their limited number of tokens, so depending on the specialty, there are a certain number of signals you're allowed to send out to programs, or tokens that you can send out to programs. By limiting that number, it means to certain programs that an applicant may be much more serious about that program than otherwise would have appeared to be. So for example, if someone like myself, I did all of my training in the state of Michigan, why would I leave the state of Michigan? Well, through this supplemental ERAS, I could potentially, one, do a geographic signaling, so it demonstrates what areas of geography I'm interested in living in, and by showing that I'm willing to live outside of the Midwest, I think that actually can help my candidacy. And the other part is, if I do a preference signal to programs that are outside of my state because I care about moving outside of the state of Michigan back when I was applying, then that might actually have helped me in getting certain interviews where programs maybe looked at my application and said, what's the likelihood this person's actually going to leave the Midwest with the entire 2 decades of their training all in the Midwest? So that's something where I think as an example that could potentially work in my favor. For the 2022 match season, as I alluded to earlier, ERAS, the supplement, was actually introduced in 3 specialties. So those 3 specialties were internal medicine, both categorical and preliminary programs, general surgery, only categorical programs, and dermatology. So those were the 3 kind of pilots that decided to go ahead and use this ERAS supplement. And what they ended up doing is, for the IM programs and Gen Surg, they allowed 5 program signals, whereas for dermatology, they allowed 3 program signals. In this year, the 2022-2023 application cycle, or 2023 match, we are finding that 11 additional specialties have joined on to be part of or evaluate the ERAS supplement, including preference signals. Now, those additional specialties include neurology, anesthesiology, diagnostic radiology and interventional radiology, emergency medicine, neurosurgery, OB-GYN, orthopedic surgery, pediatrics, PM&R, preventative medicine, and psych. Now, some caveats to that is every single specialty seems to have a different take on how they want to do it, and has there's a table here that demonstrates what the specialty number of preference signals they will allow you to have, as well as, of note, 2 specialties are not participating at all in the experiences and geographical preferences section of the supplemental ERAS. So that's an important thing to consider in the specialties, because everyone's kind of interpreting it in their own way in order to use this tool and this resource in the specialty's best interest. As of this recording right now, the different programs that will actually participate in preference signaling have not been released. According to the AAMC website, in July of 2022, we will find out which programs are going to participate. So that's something to be aware of too, is because if your specialty doesn't end up having a lot of programs participate in preference signaling, then what is the point of participating yourself, especially if there are not programs that you are actually interested in signaling? That kind of makes the whole thing change a little bit. But I kind of have a feeling that the majority of programs in each of these specialties will sign on, because it provides additional information to help really weed out the candidates that care and want to go to their program. Now, I want to move into the ERAS supplement past experiences section. So what I will back up and say is that all this information is readily available on the ERAS website and the AAMC website. All of the links to important documents that I am talking about and that I put screenshots up randomly throughout this video are in the description below, so make sure to check out some of these links, because I think it's important to read the data yourself and be able to read all the instructions yourself. Now, the first part of the ERAS supplement is the past experiences section. And when I was reading through this, had immediate flashbacks to medical school secondaries. You know, we had to go ahead and after submitting your primary, you have to go ahead and pay more money to write more essays to send to these programs to demonstrate that you want to go to their medical school. Now, the good thing about this ERAS supplement is that it's not extra money, so that's good. It does take a little extra time, but the goal was not for you to spend hours and hours and hours slaving away at the supplement. The goal is for you to just add additional pearls that may make you stand out a little more to a program and allow them to holistically review you. So the supplement should not take forever and ever and ever like your full ERAS application took to do. But that being said, a couple things, caveats. Now, one of the documents that I found actually is from the AAMC and has all this data that was collected in terms of surveys of applicants, surveys of program directors, and surveys of advisors to medical students. And this is a treasure trove of information that helps with kind of looking at how useful this supplement was to programs and to applicants. Now, this document, in terms of the past experiences portion of the ERAS supplement, the program director survey, it had said that some of these meaningful experiences or activities seemed a little redundant to the application itself. And it did also note that the other impactful life experiences essay oftentimes didn't actually reflect sustained or extraordinary hardship. So the point of this is that if you didn't actually have sustained or extraordinary hardship, don't fill out that section because it's just going to be fluff and people are going to recognize you putting fluff in there. So I think it's important to consider that. 85% of program directors did report that they used it in their initial review, that like whole past experiences thing. But you know, I think that what's interesting is that, again, the program director side, the response rate was only 33% of all three of these specialties that responded to the survey. So there could be some self-selection bias here, that the PDs that actually cared to read through some of these meaningful experiences were the ones that filled out the survey. Who knows? But in my mind, my recommendation for this section is just get it done and make sure there are no typos or grammatical things. In terms of the geographic preferences section for ERAS, I alluded to earlier that I myself might have been one of those people that benefited from this geographic preferences section. The data showed that this last year, more than 60% of applicants actually did indicate some sort of geographic preference, and 70 to 80% of applicants provided an essay or wrote something about why they had a preference or why they did not have a preference. So I think it's important to consider that, as if you don't have a preference, then you can make that clear, and that may actually be helpful for you, especially if you've had all of your education in a single entity or institution. And I think that in terms of the program director responses, this was really interesting because it seemed that more of the program directors felt that the geographic preferences section was more beneficial or helpful in deciding reviews and deciding who to interview. Now, one of the interesting statistics that they had asked her as part of the survey was that this question of, did the geographic preference or did this additional information from the supplement help the PDs identify applicants that they otherwise would have overlooked? And in this particular situation for geographic preferences, 64% of the Derm PDs and 58% of the IM PDs actually said that it may have helped them identify candidates that they would have otherwise overlooked. So I think that that's pretty interesting, and I think that that is something that demonstrates that there's some value to the geographic preferences part. Now, the part that we all care about and all came to this video for is the preference signaling portion. Now, I think that this part of the document is the most interesting and probably the part that you should focus your attention on if you are watching this and are interested in this topic, because the data showed that 85% of all the applicants that did the whole preference signaling used all five of, or used their maximum, sorry, not all five, because Derm had 3 and the other 2 specialties had 5. So they used all of their tokens or their preferences, so either 3 or 5 in last year. it was interesting that there was a non-equal distribution of preference signals. That meant that 25% of programs actually got 46 to 53% of all signals. So what's important to take away from that is that programs that are gonna get a bajillion signals, that are gonna get all the signals ever because they're like a very, very desirable program in a desirable location with the best training ever, may not find this signaling to be that beneficial, and it may not be as helpful for the applicant as well. So that, I think, can go into the whole strategy of how you're going to use your signals. And I think that that's an important caveat to take home, is that if a program is getting too many or too few signals, it may not be very helpful for the program in terms of holistic review of an applicant. It does seem that the program director survey demonstrated that program directors did seem to use the preference signaling in deciding applicants to interview, and 95 to 96% of them actually said that it was used kind of as a tiebreaker on who to interview. Now, I had said in the Geographic section that 58% of IM and 64% of DERM program directors reported that the use of the geographic preferences helped them get to applicants they would have otherwise overlooked. In the preference signaling, that number jumped up to 75% in helping them identify applicants that they otherwise would have overlooked. Now, for the part that you guys probably came to this channel for, which is, what does this all mean for you as an applicant? What are some of my predictions going into this application cycle, especially for anesthesiology as an anesthesiologist, and just general thoughts and recommendations for how to strategize the use of these preference signals. So in general, I think big picture, the preference signals actually overall can be beneficial in terms of the increasing burden of applications that residency programs have to filter through. So as a result, I actually think it can be a big benefit for applicants that really are serious about certain programs and really want to get noticed at those programs. Now, I think that there are certain applicants that would benefit more from the preference signaling than others. And I think that it also depends on the program themselves about how useful the preference signal will be for them as well. Now, I think that many name brand or highly ranked programs may not find that preference signaling helps with their application review process, because if they're in that 25% of programs that received almost 50% of all the signals, that may just indicate that it's a popular program and they did a really great job with marketing. So it's something to consider if you're thinking about your strategy, is maybe if it's a top program and you're not necessarily a top candidate, that you don't spend all of your preference signals or tokens on only top programs when those are out of your reach. Other things that I think it'll be interesting to see is how many anesthesia programs actually participate in preference signaling, because if it's a majority, I think that it will have a greater impact. If it's not a majority, then obviously the impact of it on applications will change. I think that how useful it is in terms of applicants' candidacy really depends on the factors of the applicant's competitiveness to begin with, the program's competitiveness and how many signals they receive, what the applicant's strategy is going to be. I already talked about the number of programs that decide to participate, and then obviously how competitive the cycle is that year. Because if we for some reason have a very uncompetitive application cycle in anesthesiology, for example, then having preference signals might actually make a bigger impact overall if there are just less candidates or applicants for programs. I will say that in my personal experience, many moons ago, when I was going through the residency application process, I actually did send out a pre-interview almost signal, so it was an email at that time, demonstrating an interest in 2 programs that hadn't sent me an interview yet, and I actually got interviews at both of those programs. So in some ways, this preference signaling is going to be beneficial because it minimizes some of that headache that the administrators are getting with filtering through all of these pre-interview kind of emails that come through and correspondence that comes through from applicants, and really be able to focus on the applicants that care, that use this specific mode to be able to demonstrate an interest in a program. I think that the other big thing I'll mention is that Dr. Brian Carmody offered some really great advice in his blog in terms of strategizing how to use preference signals. Now, I will just link that article down here, but I will read out that he specifically said prior to the pilot year, so last year with the 3 specialties, that if he had to do preference signaling, he would carefully research the programs, come up with a top 10 list of places that he would actually want to do residency at, and then determine which places he had a less than 10% or greater than 90% chance of interviewing. Now, if any of those programs were in the less than 10% chance or greater than 90% chance, they are eliminated from the list of 10. And then finally, if he had extra ones, then he would have to try to figure out to tie break which of the programs will likely have less signals, thus your signal will matter more at. So that I think is a really reasonable strategy, and it makes sense because that's using the information we have and using the data that we have. So it's a good way of looking at the tokens and the preference signaling and trying to come up with a meaningful strategy to work in your favor. Finally, there are some Reddit threads that go over last year's applicants who sent signals and their experiences. So how many of the signals actually resulted in interviews? Well, who really knows if it was the signal that gave them the interview or the application in the first place? Maybe the applicant themselves felt like they were gonna get that interview anyway. It's hard to know because in Reddit or on Reddit, we have no idea what the strategies were of those applicants. So some of the people who were saying, oh, it didn't help me at all, maybe their strategy was that they only put in signals to programs that were way out of their reach, so the less than 10% chance of interviewing. So who knows? Hard to say. I think that it's interesting to be able to read some of these experiences that were shared on Reddit, but it may not be super beneficial because you don't really know where they were coming from. So I wouldn't invest too much stock in taking advice necessarily from those threads. That's all I have so far. I have a lot of links down in the description to be able to share with you on things that you really need to read. So pretty much everything on the AAMC website, you should be reading through carefully because there's some really important information there that can help you with strategizing. And some of the blog entries and other things I have listed, they can be really helpful for you if you have the time to read through it. I apologize if you do hear in the background, my dog is whining because I've closed the door on her and she's scratching the door because she wants to come hang out. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video now. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on the preference signaling in general and the supplemental application. Tell me about what you're thinking down in the comments below. Do you think this is going to be helpful? Do you plan on using it if you're an applicant? Tell me everything that you're thinking. Thank you everyone for watching to this point in the video. I appreciate you. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm. If you like hearing me talk about things, then please subscribe to my channel so that you can watch me some more in the future or listen to my dog whine in the background. I hope you all have a great one and I will see you next time.